Hi, I'm Laura Banks, and I'm here today with Dr. Alan Pressman. Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit about all your many years in the health industry?
Many years, huh? Well, I've been practicing as a chiropractor and clinical nutritionist and a dietitian since 1963. A long time, right? And during that time period, I've also been a professor and chairman of a department of clinical nutrition at New York Chiropractic College, and I've taught literally thousands of students in all disciplines of health about clinical nutrition. And it's an area of deep interest, more so now than it was when I began. As I said, I began in '63, and we didn't know a heck of a lot about clinical nutrition back in 1963 compared to what we're able to do and what we're able to learn about people now. I'll give you a great example. I had the great benefit, it was really a gift, I think, of working in late 1960s, early 1970s, with a gentleman named Emanuel Sharaskin. Dr. Sharaskin was the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at the University of Alabama. And he was so ahead of his time. He was talking to us about how do you know what your patient really needs? You base it purely on symptoms, and his philosophy was that in order to properly treat somebody, you had to go way back and delve into their cellular structure. Because he proposed, and it was right, that illness starts about 10 years before you see symptoms. And that by the time you see symptoms in an individual, something has been brewing for perhaps as long as a decade. The only problem was we didn't have the tools that we do now to look back. And Dr. Sharaskin created what he called a proneness profile, meaning if you don't correct the chemistry you have now, he was able to predict what you were going to be prone to health-wise in a decade. And he was starting to talk about targeting your nutritional protocols to meet the actual needs of the patient on a cellular level rather than waiting for symptoms to occur. And it's called an organic acid profile. And I think it's one of the greatest breakthroughs in clinical nutrition that I've seen in my almost 50 years, I guess, of participating with people.
So Dr. Sharaskin was an inspiration to you. Tell us more about the beginnings for you in this profession you've been in since 1963.
Yeah, well, the beginnings were simply basing your nutritional formulations, your nutritional concept, your dietary advice on symptomatology and very vague blood chemistries. But as I've said, through the years, we've been able to look at deeper and deeper and deeper as to what's going on in your body on a level way beyond symptomatology, way before symptomatology occurs. And we've developed over the last decade this organic acid profile. I'll give you an example. If you owned a dress shop, Laura, at the end of the day, if you took all your scraps and you put them in a dumpster, and I was able to look through your dumpster, and I was a dress expert, which I'm not, but if I was a dress expert, I could look through your dumpster and tell you everything there is to know about your business. I could tell you how many jumpers you made by looking at your patterns, how many were in flannel, how many were in gingham, all the things.
How many zippers
I know a lot about your business by looking through your garbage.
Right.
Well, we now have the ability to look through your garbage, meaning your urine, and we can tell in your urine the levels of over 25 different parameters, the 25 different indicators or markers of metabolic dysfunction. And if you leave that metabolic dysfunction as is, it's going to develop into potentially a lot of different illnesses. And our goal is to look at these metabolic markers, correct them by dietary changes in supplementation, eating trends, eating habits, frequency of exercise programs, and literally change your potential for having illness by eliminating the basic bottom line causes. And that's just one thing we're able to do now that we weren't able to do then.
You started out in chiropractic care, and then you moved more into the area of health and nutrition. Tell us a little bit about why you made that transition from chiropractic.
Well, it was serendipity. I've been so darn lucky. When I graduated from chiropractic college in 1963, and I was asked to stay on and teach at the college. And the area that I was most interested in teaching was in the world of clinical nutrition. And so I started teaching nutrition at the college, and I was a really young guy. And my mentor at the time, who was one of the professors at the college, really encouraged me to continue my education, which I did. And I've been involved in clinical nutrition ever since 1963. And as I said, it's changed dramatically. And what the biggest change is, I think the thing that's the most important, is to determine what is the actual issue and not pay as much attention to the symptoms. A perfect example, I gave a quiz a few weeks ago asking about a patient comes in and says, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, what do I do? Well, the answer is there are thousands, literally over 3,000 reasons people are fatigued.
Right.
Literally over 3,000. So if I assume that your fatigue is because you're anemic and I treat you for that, well, you're not going to get better if your reason for your fatigue is hypoglycemia.
Right.
So it's really learning what the bottom line etiological causes, what the bottom line reasons are for your symptomatology, and target those. So it's really targeted nutrition. I know when I see patients coming in to see me with, and I tell them, on your first visit, I want you to bring your supplements with you.
Right.
Well, they bring 40 bottles, and they cover my desk with bottles. And I said, well, why are you taking this? I don't know, I heard about it on the radio, or I saw it on television, or whatever. But you've got to understand that we've got to get to the bottom line as to what's creating the issue in order to treat it properly.
And over the years, you've been in an extraordinary position to have a private practice in Manhattan. I know in a number of locations in Greenwich Village for a while, and now up in Gramercy. And you really entrenched yourself in the science of nutrition and health. Tell us a little bit about where you studied and where you got yourself so well educated that you can now formulate these nutraceuticals. What is your background?
I mean, I have a real eclectic background, and I've studied everything from acupuncture to chiropractic and acupuncture to herbology to naturopathic medicine. So I filled my career, I filled myself with information from every sect of medicine. So when I look at an individual, I want to look at them from what we call an allopathic point of view, meaning a traditional medical point of view, and then say, okay, now what can we add to this to support it? So we might add nutritionals, we might add amino acids or vitamins or minerals, we might add a change in diet. So it's looking at everything as if I were a team, rather than just looking at it from a traditional medical point of view. What would the nutritionist do? What would the massage therapist add to this? What would a yoga specialist add to this? What would an herbologist add to it? So I've made sure that my education includes all of those things so we can guide people into not just a traditional management, but an alternative management as well.
And you're very also up on all the pharmaceutical drugs out there and how they're affecting people and the alternative choices people can make.
Yeah, well, it's not just, it's interesting. It's not just alternative choices. It's looking at things about medication that they've never heard of before and that they're not being instructed either. For example, there was an article that appeared in one of the journals that said that if you're taking blood pressure medication, if you're taking medication for hypertension, the best time to take it is before you go to bed at night. Now, people are not being told that medically, but yet we know that most strokes occur early in the morning, most heart attacks occur early in the morning, and it is due to the fact that your blood pressure is highest in the morning. So why are you taking your blood pressure medication in the middle of the day? You should be taking it not when you get up in the morning, it's too late. Take it before you go to bed. So we're not just looking at the indications for medication and how those might be supported by nutraceuticals. We're looking at different aspects of medication that people don't hear from their medical doctor or their pharmacist.
And I know you even go into absorbing the medications you're on and how often people that are on very important pharmaceutical drugs aren't absorbing their medications properly, and they're not absorbing their food properly, and it's almost a holistic approach to.
Well, it is, because there are so many aspects of when you're dealing just with medication that people just don't understand. I mean, one of the most overly prescribed medications now are these acid blockers, like Nexium and Prilosec and Zantac, and all of those drugs which reduce hydrochloric acid in the stomach for the supposed management of gastritis or reflux disease. But do you know that when you take that, you're malabsorbing? When you take those medications, you're not absorbing your minerals. The incidence of fracture is higher in people that take those drugs than people that don't take those drugs. Do you know and realize that when you take those drugs, you're not absorbing your foods as well? You're eliminating one of the most protective barriers against bacteria and viruses. So there's a consequence to taking drugs. But something else you said is going to come up again in our conversation, I'm sure. What is the point of eating the best diet in the world. I mean, studying and reading and going to school and learning about the best diet in the world, if you don't have a clue whether or not you're digesting or absorbing that food. So, I mean,
Right.
these are the things, these are the issues that clinical nutritionists look at. And I want to talk to you a little later on about the conversation we had at our research group at the Institute of Rehabilitative Nutrition when we put together our guide to optimal health.
This is just amazing. I want to take you back a little further. I want to take you back to the very beginnings of your chiropractic interests. I know that when you were a child, you had various health challenges.
Yes.
I didn't think you knew I was going to ask you about this.
No, you didn't.
But I want to take everyone back to what were you like as a child? What happened that got you involved in the profession you're in today?
Well, I was an adorable child. I just want to make that perfectly clear that I was a very adorable child. Well-behaved, well-mannered, adorable child.
I'm sure you were.
But I had some problems.
You grew up in Brooklyn.
Grew up in Brooklyn, right. And I stayed in Brooklyn until I was into my 20s. The only problem with my childhood was
Right.
I couldn't breathe.
That was a problem.
That was a real problem. I had very severe asthma. And from the time I was a little kid, in fact, I was born, not a pretty picture. I was blue. I was one of those blue babies.
Blue baby.
I had a blue baby, and I had a club foot, which meant one foot was going this way, the other foot was going that way. So in the delivery room, I was in an asthma attack. I had a club foot, and I was cyanotic. I was all blue. As a child, I was asthmatic. And the only thing that was able to rescue me, because there were very few meds for asthma back then, were chiropractic adjustments. And it was unheard of in 1942, 43, 44 to go to chiropractors. The profession was really just beginning back then. But a chiropractor back then made an enormous difference in my life. So by the time I was 6, 7 years old, I knew that I wanted to be involved in chiropractic, and he wouldn't let me eat certain foods and made our family aware of nutrition. And that's how it all began.
Who found the chiropractor?
Well, that's another whole sad story. My mother got polio.
Right.
And she had chiropractors come to the house to adjust her as part of her rehab program for polio.
So this inspired you,
Yeah,
basically.
it inspired me, and what inspired me most through the years was getting to and I think this is the most important thing, getting to the root cause of what the issue is with a patient, rather than just treating the symptoms. That's really the bottom line.